Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, both here and abroad, for another installment of the Key Code Media Keeping You Ahead of Technology series. Tonight's presentation, Live Production Tips and Tricks, is being broadcast live from the Delancey Theater in beautiful South Beach here in San Francisco. I'm Michael Kamas, Senior Technology and Workflow Consultant at Key Code Media, and we've assembled an all-star cast, an all-star lineup to share their collective insider brain power to help you produce a better show, the logistics, the technology, and the production itself. Before we dive into meeting our esteemed panelists, the great wizard behind the Key Code curtain, Mike Cavanaugh, the president of Key Code Media, would like to say a few words. Mike?
Thank you very much. They don't let me out much, so I really enjoy this, especially when we go live streaming. This is our second event that we've streamed, and what we decided this year to do was really develop a theme of keeping you ahead of technology and focus on events that could help you stay ahead of technology, bear within your risk profile of investments, and be successful and make more money. One of the things when we thought about this live production was real simple. I grew up across the bay, and I remember back when we had channel 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, and 44, and that was it. And if you wanted to watch anything being broadcast from anywhere, that was pretty much the only way you could. No cable, no nothing. And the technology that's come about, leveraging the backbone of the internet, has transformed what we do. And it's been great for Key Code Media because we've been really helping clients set up production pipeline workflows of digital technology from acquisition, editorial, storage, asset management, encoding, and distribution. And it's incredibly exciting that anybody now can be a broadcaster. And tonight we have a great panel. These people are experienced. I talk to people throughout the country, and the 4 people we have tonight who we'll introduce in a few minutes are some of the best out there in the industry, and they've been doing it for longer. I mean, San Francisco is really the hotbed for driving technology, and I think you guys will have a great time tonight. Just sort of a commercial for us, if this stuff's interesting, and obviously do business with the panelists from an event perspective, but if you want to invest in the technology from editorial, acquisition, storage, cameras, etc., we're located literally about a mile from here on 55 Hawthorne, right by the convention center. We'd love to engage with you. And we also have offices for the remote people out there on the worldwide broadcast in Seattle, Burbank, and Santa Monica, and Irvine. So thank you very much for attending. I think it's going to be a great time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Cavanaugh. He actually mandates I call him Mr. Cavanaugh, so thank you. I want to remind everyone in attendance, all of you, that you're eligible for a free iPad, an iPad 2 actually. So if you've signed, make sure you sign up with Chris outside or you're not eligible. So if you haven't, go and do so. Also, I want to tell everyone out there that tonight's stream is brought to you by the TriCaster by NewTek as well as Full View Media. So now on to our panelists. Sitting directly to my left is Lenny Ferreira. Lenny is the co-founder of Full View Media, which is a boutique webcasting and video production company. Over the past 16 years, Lenny has worked with all of the major Hollywood studios and is currently helping Fortune 500 companies in San Francisco produce media for their online audience. Next we have Jamie Morgenstern. Jamie Morgenstern is the Director of Operations at BAM.TV. BAM.TV is a San Francisco media startup that produces and distributes video programming for independent musicians. Jamie works to improve production workflow and develop new business opportunities in the cable, mobile, and web spaces. Thank you for attending, Jamie. Next, we have Victoria Crimmins. Victoria Crimmins is the conference manager at NVIDIA. She serves as the conference manager for large-scale events, including the GPU Technology Conference. In this role, she's produced several live production events targeted at different audiences. She also heads up the NVIDIA Corporate Speakers Bureau. She is currently a member of the International Resources Committee for ACM, SIGGRAPH, assisting international speakers for SIGGRAPH conferences worldwide. Thank you, Victoria. We're going to hear that all night.
No, I'll stop.
Last but certainly not least, we have Tony Welch. Tony Welch is the Creative Services Director at Beyond Pick Studios. From what I've been told, at age 12, Tony declared that he wanted to make movies for a living. A BFA in video and film production, 10 years of broadcast news and commercial production experience, and a lifetime of After Effects rendering later, Tony still pursues that goal as an Emmy award-winning creative services director at Beyond Pic Studios, where he's responsible for ushering projects through the entire project workflow. Tony, thank you. So why don't we start off pretty basic. As we're doing tonight, we're streaming the event. So I'd like to get everyone's input on what do you think is the most difficult part of budgeting for a streaming event? Because as we all know, it boils down to money. So what is the most difficult part of budgeting for a streaming event?
I mean, I think
Tony?
to start, I mean, I guess if a client calls and they say they want to stream their event, and what is it going to cost? I mean, the first thing I think of is there are so many pieces, and how, which pieces do they mean when they would talk about their budget? Which pieces go into the budget? The video production portion, the distribution, the encoding, and it's all can add up really quickly depending on how big or small it is. And next thing is how long is their event? Is it an hour? Is it 2 days? I mean, you can have really huge discrepancies in the low end and the high end of a budget based on those factors.
I also think it comes down to maybe experience. There are organizations that have been webcasting or streaming for a long time and have an expectation of quality and know what that costs. Then there are people that use free resources, which are great to get things going. And then there are people that just don't understand either of those two, where they say, I want awesome quality at that low price. And that's sort of, you have to try to educate and communicate how you can get to that high quality at a reasonable budget for everyone.
From our perspective, we do live music, so depending on the scope of the project, it really comes down to how big a crew you need. So how many cameras, how many production assistants, how many people you need on the ground really directing the operation. We've done small scale productions, and we've done things where you have 20 plus people running an operation. So it really comes down to the project.
Well, is there in a particular order? Obviously, budget is part of planning a live production, but is there an order? Like, you determine what budget is, and that determines how many cameras, and that determines how many people you're hiring, or is it more, from a more artistic standpoint? What is your order of operations in terms of planning out an event?
I mean, I'd say I tend to try to segregate immediately sort of everything. I think of it as like there's like a spigot, and everything that gets to the spigot is all the video production. So how many cameras, how many people, what the creative is. And then once you figure that all out and you kind of get your show going, you get to that spigot, then there's the other side, which is how is it distributed? What is the experience of viewers on the other end? What is the participation level of viewers on the other end? And that's sort of its own. So I try to kind of segregate it into two. And both can have their own growing and shrinking budgets depending on that. And once that's determined, it's also a little bit easier to really gauge where the client comfort level is with both of those.
We have a hard time with, on the webcasting side, I think the best thing to do is, well, how much do you have? And we can, here's what you can get for that kind of money. And the challenge ends up being, well, how many people do you think are going to watch and for how long? And the answer inevitably for that is, well, we don't know. 5,000, I mean, in fact, there was a conversation with a company that we were talking to about, well, how many people are going to watch? Well, maybe 100,000. Well, 100,000, that's an enormous event, and that's going to cost a substantial amount of money. Do you even have that budget? And what ends up happening is, you might get 50 out of that, or even 10,000, which is a ridiculously large audience. We have an idea in that, particularly for corporate events, you'll know there's a steady number, or it's kind of predictable, and you can kind of start to guide people. Say, well, you might get 100 for this, 300 for this. If it's really popular or interesting, you might get 500. 10,000, I mean, that's a really big event. That's, that's really where the difficulty, I think, ends up being from a budgeting point of view, from the webcast side, let alone the production side.
Right. I would tend to agree with Lenny, because as somebody who is on the other side of it, looking at budget, and when we're first starting out producing live events, we don't know how many people, and we kind of go through the question of asking ourselves, what if too many people? What if 2,000 people all of a sudden show up and we haven't budgeted for it? Obviously that means on one hand it's a success, But on the other hand, it's not something that we've budgeted for. So we try to be flexible, and the more and more you do these events, the more you start to learn, for your audience, how many people will come online, and then that kind of helps you with the budgeting.
Are there any hidden things that you find maybe people who are just starting out streaming, just starting to do these live events? Are there any things that you always catch that you find people who are just starting out don't pay enough attention to that you could probably share with our audience? Everything from, well, we didn't have water bottles for the talent, or we didn't get enough food for our people who are showing up to the event, or we didn't pay for enough bandwidth. Are there things that are commonly overlooked or underestimated?
Well, you'll never have a bandwidth issue in that. That's actually a popular, potentially misconception in that people will say, or when we price it out, so you'll have tiers, 100 people, 200, 500, 1,000, and then they'll say, oh, well, what if 501 people show up, or way more than that? It's completely scalable. It doesn't actually matter. No one ever gets shut down or shut off or unable to come in. In fact, that might be a good ploy or tactic to get people to come to your show and say limited streams availability. So tune in now. But that part isn't usually an issue. I think the hidden issues usually are with talent on stage.
Yeah, or sometimes
Present company excluded, of course.
Well, I'm wearing a checkered shirt, which I advise everyone never to wear. But
No stripes either.
no stripes. But I wanted to illustrate.
I think sometimes it's also kind of like Lenny was saying earlier. A lot of times you'll sort of ask a client, well, what's the end purpose of this? Not only how many viewers are you going to have, but are you going to have people that want to participate in chat? Are you going to have people submitting questions? Do those need to be moderated? Kind of what's the other side? If I'm a viewer, what type of participation and expectations do you expect of your audience? And a lot of times they're almost looking at it from just inside the company when they haven't really thought much about that. And yet they're like, oh, we want to do it on mobile and we want to have chat. I mean, it's like, okay, so who do you anticipate using those? And how do you anticipate that interaction being part of the whole thing? And so that's sometimes a sorry.
That brings up a very good point. There's this new thing out there called the social media. And so how are you using that to boost viewers, to boost interaction, and to gain metrics, to find out what people want to see, so you're creating a project that people would tune into?
So for us, we're working with up-and-coming indie musicians, and from our end, it's really about getting the grassroots kind of show for people coming. If they're being driven by a label or they're being driven by a blog, like really getting them out in numbers, and that is really tricky. You need to kind of work all those networks and not only promote it going up to the event, but getting people to stay tuned in. And the content from what we do is a little bit different. We work less with clients, more with bands that are trying to break. So we really have to, do our best to keep the content compelling and keep the users engaged and keep them tuned in. So it's less corporate, more kind of entertainment in a way.
Are you finding more return, I guess, or more interest on Twitter or Facebook, or are we going more corporate with LinkedIn? Where are you finding the most interest in promoting these events?
I think that promoting the events can be done through all of those, but choosing the platform where you're actually going to be communicating with your audience is important. I think I've done the Facebook chat where we've taken questions from the live audience, and that's something that I found the presenters really like, because they get questions from the in-person audience as well, but taking questions from, hey, John from Texas is writing into you, chatting in. We haven't had success taking Twitter questions, only because the Twitter, you kind of have to be really specific, but we built a Facebook landing page that we were able to take interactive questions from the audience, and even take questions online after the presenter finished and while the next presenter was setting up. I think the one really important thing about streaming and engaging your audience in social media, and it's a lesson that we learned, is because we usually do full day events. Like, don't ever turn off the stream, because the minute you turn off the stream, your audience goes back down to 0, and then you have to start all over again building up your audience through social media.
I think they're both really different, and it's kind of been interesting to watch. So we've done events where you have the live Facebook chat stream within Facebook, and that's kind of unique in and of itself. And what I like about it is it really fosters an engagement, like Victoria is saying. You can actually get people to get sucked in and watch the event. Now, the numbers may or may not be huge, but you might have 20, 30, 40, 50 people for a sustained amount of time engaging with you and your speaker, your brand, or whoever you are over an 8-hour day. And so we've also done things with Twitter. I mean, there are different approaches. The Twitter approach works as well, and having that live Twitter stream going is nice. But we've also done events where a particular event was with Condoleezza Rice and Jeff Colvin. He was interviewing her on a panel, and that was a really popular event, and they wanted questions from the audience, but they didn't moderate the Twitter feed. Not that anything bad was coming up, but the questions were relentless. So they couldn't answer the question because they didn't have ask the question because they didn't have enough time reading the question. So you have to really kind of try to play both of them. One of them is a much more slower, engaged experience, and while the other one is just sort of, not useless, but it's just kind of a megaphone type of thing.
I'd like to remind all of our viewers that if you look below the streaming window on keycodemedia.com, you'll see a name, a hashtag that you can use to tweet questions, which I will get right here, and you may be the lucky person whose tweet I read off, KCMSF Live 2012. Why don't we move a little bit from the pre-production planning to the day that you're, the day before or the day that you're on set. You're on location, you're setting up. What are some of the most common pitfalls that you run into when you're setting up for the physical live event?
Forgetting some cable or some wire, and it's something really small, and you have to run to Radio Shack to see if they have it. I mean, we tried to fix that by putting together basically a toolbox just full of every possible, cable or something. But there's always something it's always just something off, and it's just very tricky because you're managing all these different things. You're dealing with sound, you're dealing with video, you're dealing with a talent, and it's unpredictable in a lot of ways. Mostly the technology, but things happen.
And you always have 10 of the other cables that you don't need, but that one that you definitely need. From our point of view, depending on the scale of the production, let's say we're working with Beyond Pix or a production company, the great thing is, those cables are all theirs, and we just show up and they give us feeds, and all we need to do is sort out the network part of it. And that's used to be a lot more difficult back in the ISDN days, but now it's all gotten pretty reliable and pretty straightforward. Where we still budget an entire day to make sure that everything gets dialed in, but it's really packing up, making sure you've got everything you need, and I like to stage it actually ahead of time the night before and restage it. Mm-hmm. But there's always something.
Yeah, I think when you hit the ground on the day, I think it's that clock seems to go about twice as fast as it normally does. And I think for us, I know once you get past 4 people, one of the common things is communication. Like when you have more than 4 people and you've broken people, a crew of say 10 or 15 or 20, and you have people that are broken up into different groups, like a simple thing like two-way radios, so you can communicate, becomes really critical. We've had times where we've forgotten that, or we haven't had enough of them, and we're literally running across the production trying to get a simple message to somebody, or when you're trying to troubleshoot a connection or something. And so just making sure you have the basics of communication so that you can communicate with your team easily and quickly. And also, I think when the team's small, that's when you have to make sure that before you even hit the ground, you know who's going to be responsible for what troubleshooting, because it can quickly become everybody's worried about the same thing, and then 3 people, if you only have 4, 3 of the 4 spend 30 minutes trying to troubleshoot the same problem, and then you get that fixed, and now you start to hit other ones, and you don't have any time to fix those. So just making sure that you give some thought to the team and how you distribute issues.
Well, speaking of team, I was curious, productions can be very small. One-man band who's doing something in their garage because they enjoy it, all the way up to something with Condoleezza Rice. So we have a wide latitude of kind of productions. What would you say the bare minimum would be? We have tools out there like the TriCaster, which we're using tonight, and that, of course, can be run by 1 or 2 people. And 10 years ago, to do the same, you needed a dozen people. So if you were to break it down to get the best possible product, how many people would you say would be a good base number to start with?
I think it comes down to expertise, and there are so many disciplines, and that's actually the challenge. There are so many disciplines, and even sort of the web page part of it, which we haven't even talked about, that in and of itself brings its own set of issues that may become an issue. So being able to, for small events, I think someone really needs to be well-rounded in production, audio, which is the most critical, encoding, all of that stuff. It's gotten easy enough. I mean, the TriCaster is great, but it's gotten easy enough, and the web development. So there are 4 disciplines that you need to put out fires, be able to put fires out really fast. And they will come within the last hour. One of those things are going to be on fire within the last hour. So that's where the experience kind of comes in. Not to discourage, I think there are lots of tools out there, from Wirecast to the TriCaster to just even Osprey cards, that are great for getting people started and getting people going with free webcasting resources. I'm all for anything that gets people going and understanding the ROI and the value of it, because that eventually means that they are going to need professional tools and professional people to run those productions.
Before we jump into the technical portion, you touched on a couple, polysyllabic technical words. But one of the things you mentioned, it's ROI, and I think that's kind of the real hidden subject behind all of this. How are you making money off that? So how are you judging ROI? Obviously, if this is you're pushing a web store, well, how many sales did you get directly from that? But when you're just pushing out information, how are you judging ROI?
Well, I guess you could do that in a couple of ways. I mean, audience volume, the number of people attending would be one way. I think the level of engagement within an event. So if you, like I said, if we do like a long, all-day type of event, and you have people hanging around for a few hours, then that I find successful. It's not our job necessarily to monetize that right away, but creating environments within that sort of player experience where you might have a call to action. I think that's really important. Go buy a card and use this discount code. Then that way you can also tie it back to your specific event. I think that would be one strategy to be able to do that. It all depends on where you are on this process.
I also think that capturing what you do in that live moment and making it on demand can add a lot of value to something that can be relatively little additional cost if you're editing it into little segments or whatever you're going to do. But taking that content that's being created live and remarketing it down the road in various ways is also a way to boost value.
And if you also think about the numbers, I mean, for music at least, you put some indie artist in front of 5,000 viewers. That's bigger than most music venues in San Francisco. So the same thing goes for corporate events. I'm sure it's putting them in front of a lot of viewers that you couldn't cram into a space, and that's got to be worth something.
Yeah. I think on our corporate blog, the average time people spend is 1.5 to 2 minutes. But in our live streams, we found that the average time is almost 20 minutes. So for us, that was a huge eye-opening thing that provided a lot of ROI to us. It's like, okay, we're providing content that's engaging people for almost 20 minutes at a time when our average blog time is under 2 minutes. So we look at the type of people who are watching, how long, and how often they're engaging with us, asking the questions to the speakers, and the back and forth dialogue. I think creating the community is something that we definitely value when we're looking at it.
That's almost, to take a step almost back further, it's almost like when you're going to put on this event, or if someone calls you, you're going to do it or hire you, I think one of the things that you should have on your mind is, how am I going to measure success? How are we going to measure it? And what is the overall goal of this whole thing going into it? Is it to increase viewership? Is it to drive a call to action to a specific thing? And identify that and make sure that you have a way to measure that.
I think back to Jamie's point, I think people sort of tend to overlook 5,000 people is a lot of people. And I remember a couple of years ago, Facebook first did a live stream with, I think it might have been Britney Spears, some pop band. Right? And someone wrote about it in some tech blog, calling it a miserable failure because at that time, Facebook had maybe 500 million people, and only 100,000 people showed up to go watch Britney Spears live. And so that's 0.000 whatever percent. And meanwhile, he wasn't really looking at it, with the right goggles. She had 100,000 people watching a live video stream, which is ridiculous. I mean, that's a huge amount. That's a stadium. So if you could charge $5 or $2.50, and convert 20% of that, that might be some money.
Yeah.
So moving to the zeros and ones, let's talk a little bit about the technical side of it. Obviously, scaling with productions, whether it be, again, one person in his garage all the way up to a large production. What kind of gear do you find in your tech backpack in terms of cameras and streaming gear and switchers? Can you give me some examples, what you always carry with you?
We have in our studio, so we do full live sound. We run everything through 32-channel Pro Tools rig. We also have like front of house sound. And then we send that audio signal to the TriCaster 850, the big kahuna. And we run like 3 or 4 Sony EX3s over SDI, and then just pump out the stream directly from the TriCaster. That's kind of the overview for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the technical side, I think it's less when it comes to us about what equipment and on an individual level, and more how they work together. We've had on one end of the spectrum, we just had a job a few weeks ago in Vegas where, it was a one-camera shoot. It was kind of just like coverage, and the client's like, "Oh, can we just like Ustream this to everybody?" And our camera guy's like, "Well, plug." Right, like in the laptop kind of thing. And then the other end of the spectrum where we do have, HD cameras feeding into a TriCaster and streaming it that way, or HD cameras to an encoder that Lenny will bring and we do it that way. So I think really it's just you have to give some thought into what type of equipment you're going to use together, and going forward, how often are you going to use that equipment, and is that equipment flexible enough for you if you need to scale up or down?
I think I'm on both sides of that spectrum, where on the high end, we'll use the inlet spinnaker for the HD multi-bit rate encoding. We've worked with the TriCasters as well, but most of the time when we get involved with working with companies like Beyond Pix, they'll just give us the feed, and we'll sort of do all of that magic with the high-end boxes. On the complete low end, I still use a DVX 100 composite. So that's for nonprofits who, their budget is low. And so for me, what's really critical is the fact that my gear is going to work. And so we will go all the way down to an Osprey card in an old PC doing composite encoding. It still looks good. It worked. The message got out. That's what's important. And we were able to meet that client's expectations. So it's really within that range. Anything beyond, when it starts to get into switching, we really don't want to get involved. That's where we kind of go in with larger production companies. Our core is really just on the webcasting part of it.
Well, you mentioned streaming, and that's probably where we should spend a few minutes on, because I think streaming is kind of a mystery to a lot of people as far as how do you stream, what format, and then how do you get people to view it? Do you view it on your website? Do you view it on what we call CDNs, like Ustream? So I was hoping that someone on the panel could explain to the audience just what the difference is between CDN and streaming yourself and some of the pitfalls. I think Lenny's chomping at the bit. I really do.
Well, I don't want to monopolize this. I don't want to be that guy. No, but I think what you guys are doing is really interesting. One, content-wise, two, what your CDNs are, and how you guys are getting your stuff out.
Can you explain to everyone what a CDN is?
A content delivery network. So we use Akamai primarily. They are sort of the largest. They've been around the longest doing it. And so for me, what's important is reliability and sleep. I don't really want to manage servers. I want to make sure that an audience can reach our streams globally, and a CDN will help you do that. There's a cost associated with that, but it's really time and money and sleep and money and all that. And so that's what's important to me, particularly if you're going to do a large-scale event. Like I said, I do encourage free resources, live stream. We actually work with Ustream and another production company to actually put on events for them if they have, for their high-profile events. So all of those are great. Justin TV is one that you guys use. Amazon's got servers where you can use Wowza servers. Those are great as well. A lot more management involved, or you really need to be able to get under the hood and configure. But they work, and they work really well. It all really depends.
And when you're saying, just for the sake of the audience, CDN, you're really talking about taking what's one stream from your live event, putting it up into the server, and making that one stream X amount of streams for your audience, right? That's what the CDN does. It takes your stream and makes it, 500 streams or 50 streams or 5,000 streams.
And I think one of the benefits of that is obviously when you're streaming out of the back of whatever your streaming device is, if you're pushing your own stream, meaning one flavor, that means everyone on the planet who wants to view your stream views it in that one flavor. Whereas if you use a CDN, a lot of times CDNs will not only spread the load over multiple servers, but also do it in different flavors. So you can view it on your iPad or your Droid or your computer at home. So doing that, what do you find, let me find a better way to phrase that. What do you find most people are going to? Are most people wanting to bring it in-house and do their own stream and I want to manage everything? Or are a lot of them saying, you know what, there are people who do it better, people who do it faster, and I can afford it. I'm going to go with the CDN.
I find that people don't want to get involved at all. I think that they really don't. They just don't want to manage it. I find we do, so in the corporate space, there are your organizations that have that infrastructure in-house and internal, and they already do it. We tend to deal more with marketing, and they just want it managed somewhere else. They also want to sleep or know that they can sleep because someone else is managing that and is going to be successful for them. So that really, most people don't want to do it at all. Even IT departments don't want to do it. Depending on, for large scale organizations, they're like, well, we don't actually want that on our network at all. So go ahead and go to a CDN.
I think a lot of people may recall the brouhaha between Adobe and Apple last year with Flash, no Flash, and I think that's kind of moved itself to the web. What are you streaming? What are you looking at? Are you looking at a Flash or are you looking at a QuickTime file? And since I know Lenny and a few of you are doing this quite often, what are you seeing as the biggest request? And do you see it moving to another platform because of Apple's dominance?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to that, we're not really getting requests. Like they don't know. They just want, well, can people watch on their iPads? That's as much as they know or care. So I think as far as requests, they're really kind of leaving it to us to determine what's going to work best for them based on what they want to do. And they don't really know or care how the specifics are handled.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think the details don't really matter, and it took a long time to learn that. Just trust me, I'll take care of it, you'll be fine.
Well, then let's share
to answer your question, I think that it's not uncommon for someone to show up at a venue with their iPad and say, how come I can't watch it on this? And then you go to the client who might be right there. And I've actually done this. It's going to be another $2,000 to go to that guy. At the end of the day, the percentage of people that actually do watch on mobile devices is really, really small. I'd be curious to find out if that's the case with you as well.
Yeah, not at this point. I mean, I think that you'll see in probably the next year or two. Yeah. I think, quite frankly, I think Apple won. I think Steve Jobs waged his war on Adobe and won, and we're going to see, HTML5 streaming become, much more widespread in probably the next year or two.
If I could be the controversial Mark Cuban on the panel, I don't think that that's a good thing today, because I think what Flash enabled us to do over the last handful of years has really transformed the online video business. But but that's where it's going. That's where it's going. He won, and we need to fulfill on that. I watch quite a bit of video content on my iPad and even my iPhone, but in a corporate setting, it's still not the case. I mean, yeah, it's still not the case. Primarily Flash. Primarily PCs, primarily IE, Google being the second most popular. Firefox is gone.
Firefox is gone? When did that happen?
Yeah, it's losing ground. So you really want to just, if the dollars are limited, that's your audience. I'd like to go for 80%. That's not a bad number.
It's a tough spot to be in, though, because, I mean, as I'm sure all of you know, Apple holds so much weight. It's going to make clients nervous if they ask, well, can people watch it on their iPhones? And it's like, well, maybe not. And they're like, well, they have to be able to. Well, even if we did, you know, I mean, you're talking about if you're lucky enough to get an audience of 500, of the 500, 15, right, 25 might watch it on their iPhones, but there's sort of that, you know, as always, managing the client's expectations in terms of getting them to understand what we're really talking about when we say, hey, do you need this to stream to iPhones or iPads?
Oh, by the way, the Android device kind of works. So, oh, those are those other guys.
Yeah.
Let's get even a little bit more geek, because I before we started broadcasting, I talked to quite a few clients, and a lot of them were asking about stuff like, what resolution do you broadcast at? 1080, 720. Thoughts?
I mean,
No?
we haven't done 720 yet. I mean,
We do 720 and below. I mean, it just really depends on where we are streaming from.
And what is your player size?
640.
Yeah. 640, 360 is kind of becoming the standard size.
and even that at full, if you hit the full screen, looks great.
Yeah.
You know.
And what kind of bit rate are we talking at? I know obviously what codec you're using makes all the difference, but if you're looking for an internet connection for your house or the facility you're going to, what do you always want to make sure you have in terms of upload speed to make sure that you're getting a decent quality signal?
I like 600K.
That seems pretty light.
Yeah, I think 600K is good enough for everyone. Well, if you're doing internal communications, then it's really hard to get even above 350, 400. A lot of the companies that we've worked with internally, they don't want us to go above 300, so we won't tell them that we're doing it maybe at 450 or something.
So that's your bit rate. You're looking
That
at
ends
around
up
between
being
3 and 400?
Yeah, for
Okay.
internal, right, because
Okay.
it becomes quite difficult. But for external, I think anyone should be able to handle a 600K stream. And it actually makes a pretty big difference from 512 to 768. Those last 256K really help quite a bit. If we,
I'm sorry.
I think we usually do 1084, but I mean, now that I'm listening to you, maybe I might go back and suggest otherwise.
yeah, I think that if you want to consume the media, I think you can't get a modem. Well, you can still get an AT&T connection that doesn't. But I think 600K is pretty consistent, and even that's what Ustream you do with those guys.
Yeah.
And I mean, the codecs, compared to what, all of us probably remember trying to watch video on the web 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and now it's kind of the same talking about 720 versus 640 by 360 in full screen. It's like,
Right.
unless you're looking at something that's really, really critical detail, you can, I think the 3 to 500 range is suitable for 80% of.
And on the high end, you can go up to, I've seen 3 megabits. I think that's really a lot, and that's a small market or a small percentage of people that can actually ingest that. Going above 1,500 to 2 megabits, I don't think that's necessary.
I have a couple questions from Twitter. I'm going to throw one out there. First one is from PDX Films. They'd like to know if anyone is using HDSLRs with HDMI out for webcasting.
I tried.
You tried?
Yeah, it's really difficult. Well, one, you can't with any of the cameras that only have 12-minute time, like the Canons don't do it. I tried with the the GH2? Mm-hmm. The GH2 actually does give you a full-time, rather a 1080p, I don't actually know what the signal is. And if you have a battery, or rather a power to that camera, you can get sort of, all-day back-of-the-room type of stuff. But I had to go into an Aja to go HDSDI, and the signal just doesn't pass through. So I'm looking, I'd like to really create a really small rig that you can just go out and do guerrilla-style webcasting with a really decent quality. And I think that was close, but there's no DSLR that'll do that.
I actually just read, I think yesterday, that the Nikon D800 is just coming out, and it's supposed to give a clean HDMI out, and that's like the big. It's the first full frame camera since the 5D Mark II, so people are pretty stoked. But Canon has such a large market share that.
Here's another Twitter question, which is I think will be a good conversation. Heike wants to know, do you have issues with music rights when going online?
So in our case, that's an interesting question. We actually we do license deals with the artists, so we don't charge artists to record. We actually get a license to the content that we produce. So no, it's all worked out in the background there.
Well, if you're broadcasting, there's intro music. When everyone walked in tonight, we had some music playing. What's the legal ramifications of that? Can you do that? Is that applicable?
For us, we use all music that we've licensed for that, so we're pretty strict about that actually. But yeah, I mean, I've heard that the ASCAP BMI guys are going to come after you, so we really try to be careful about that, especially if you're getting any sort of traffic on your videos. You never know who's watching out there.
Yeah, it's certainly a risk. Stock music is pretty licensable, pretty easy. But if you just throw any track up there, the more recognizable it is to you, the more recognizable it's going to be to everybody else who sees the stream.
Right.
So, you kind of got to bear that in mind, and it's always a conversation we have to have with our clients because we could use this song. It's like, well, getting licensing for that's going to take about 6 weeks. It cost about $25,000. So.
And if they insist, do you say, no, I won't, or are they liable for that? Where does that fall in the legal realm?
I usually make them say in writing that they want to use the song, and as a production company, it's our responsibility to make sure that the music's licensed. If we can get our clients and they really insist on doing it, I'll say, well, here are your options. You either take liability for it, or we pursue doing it proper. And that's we have to give them that choice.
I actually have a question directly to Jamie. So, Tony Aradia from Homegrown Hits wants to know, what kind of budget do you need to shoot a live concert and make it look pro?
I think so that's kind of a tough question, but
Back to the first one.
yeah. Today with the onset of the DSLRs and everything, obviously the price of production has come down significantly. But in order to do it live, I mean, it costs. You've got your crew, you've got your space, you have everything down the line, and you're looking at $5,000 plus. I'd say it's not cheap. On the other hand, if you go into a venue, maybe you have a couple DSLRs, you get sound off the board. Maybe you can't stream live, but the production costs are, significantly lower. It'll be interesting once we can get those DSLRs into the TriCaster. It'll be really cool.
That's a significant
huge.
roadblock that with the DSLRs. It's just you can't right now. You will soon, but right now you just can't get a continuous, clean resolution signal out of the DSLRs right now. For the most part, which is really the stumbling block for everything. If you can get a consistent signal out of those, then you can convert that or use that or whatever. But right now, the DSLRs, as they are, pretty much you can kind of capture footage and then use that to edit with, but the whole live thing is not.
Yeah, I was really disappointed about that GH2 because it's small, you can put a nice big lens. We do back of the room stuff, so you have a nice lens that you can really be as far back as you want and get a really clean image, but it just, at a professional level, gear-wise, it didn't work.
Tony, I think earlier you had mentioned, what you do with the stream afterwards. Meaning, do you put it online? Do you chop it up and put it on DVD? What are you finding as a decent way to make money off the stream later? Do you find putting it up on YouTube in 15-minute chunks? Do you find putting it on DVD or just VOD? What are some ways that your clients are using to make use of the stream afterwards?
Well, I mean, it really boils down to that initial conversation I mentioned about making sure that you talk about what's the goals and how do you measure it for a production. I think that typically, for us at least, it falls into kind of two. Either it's something you're trying to get an ROI on marketing, in which case, cutting it up into different segments, or just getting one sort of highlights of the event or one short video that has a call to action or some branding on it and pushing that out to everything they can, all of their social media, YouTube, all that stuff. That's one way when they just get their image out there or their brand out there. The other way is if it's content that's meant to be consumed on a more like e-learning or product demo or something like that, where they really, they may have 4 chapters that explain 4 different parts of a product, or 4 different sales meeting information that's meant for an internal audience. That kind of stuff, you can then just have a pay-per-click kind of situation where users are getting, or viewers are getting, paying a certain amount of fee to look at a certain amount of clips.
We actually created an on-demand area where people could come look at all of our content, and we just make everything available. They do the record streaming. You can just click on and watch the stream, or you can download an FLV or an MP4, or even the PDF of the presentation that the presenter gave. So we've kind of made all formats available and made presentations available in their entirety, because for the same reason that you mentioned, like it just didn't make sense to kind of break up a presentation into random kind of, or wherever YouTube felt, 15-minute segments. It just doesn't flow well. So after a few years, we just decided, we're just going to create everything, put it on demand. Some of it's hosted, through our company. Some of it's hosted by Full View Media. It just depends.
Yeah, and I think it just comes back to, like, why are you streaming this at all? What are you trying to accomplish with your stream? And that will help educate a bit about what you should do with it or could do with it after.
We're going to get to some questions from the audience in a few minutes, so if you all will get your questions ready, I can ask the panel up here. While we're doing that, I would love to hear from each person if there was one bit of advice you could give to anyone starting up, starting to do this. If it could be a monologue, that's fine, but if you can give them some advice that you think that every startup needs to know when they're doing this, what would it be? I know that's a deep one.
Start with Tony.
Did I start with Tony?
I guess from the production standpoint, I guess I'll say just make sure you have equipment that works well together, and make sure that you've tried it out a lot and you have a lot of confidence in it, and that you've made it easy to troubleshoot on the day of. Especially the smaller you are, if you're just trying to do it with a few amount of people, you really don't need expensive equipment necessarily. You can get. It's more important that you get complementary equipment. And a small scale, like we're talking about, a composite signal's 640 by 480, and we're talking about shooting in HD cameras and dumbing that down to 640 by 360. So, an SD camera that you can pick up from anywhere. Actually, I haven't even picked up one these days. Maybe you can't find them anymore. But a regular SD camera or an HD camera that can put out that signal is really all you need. So I think making sure you have your equipment and you've tried it out and you can give a solution from camera, clean audio feed, to a device that can get it on the web and that's consistent and works. I think that's my first bit of advice.
Victoria?
I would say, especially if you're going to be interacting with your audience, make sure that you have someone who's dedicated to managing your social media, who's there and can help you filter the questions. In most cases, I was the one introducing the speakers, getting them ready in between. I usually have no time to do that. So you have to find someone who's dedicated to helping you create the community, especially if you're the on-camera talent. Make sure that you have other people who are helping you with the live production, because you can't do it by yourself.
I guess my advice would just probably be patient. There's a learning curve. Like it's gonna be a little tricky at first, but there's a lot of basic things, basic production. If you don't have a production background, you can do some basic stuff. Interview techniques and things like that can really improve the production value of your stream or your live capture. And there's just a ton of really good resources out there. Learn from people that have done it before. And yeah, I mean, it's such a cool thing. Like, I remember the first time I streamed from the TriCaster. We just had one camera set up, and I was just kind of blown away. I mean, it's kind of like using Skype for the first time or something, but it's better. I mean, you're broadcasting to everyone, and it's really cool.
I think to reiterate what Tony said, depending on the scale, is it really a lot of times comes down to the reliability of your gear and making sure that it's not going to fail you at showtime. Then the reliability of you actually knowing how to use that gear, which that can be easy enough, no problem. The hard part really then comes down to that last hour right before the event. And everything was working when there wasn't anyone in the room. And you had it dialed in, the stream was up, it was all good. And then the client shows up and wants to talk to you. And they have made changes, other things have happening. So that's going to take years to learn how to keep your cool and manage you as well as people coming to you and talking to you. But that just takes experience. So and we actually work with a lot of companies and their internal teams to help them do these initiatives internally. Because, I mean, more events internally can be webcast within a company than we're ever going to get called to do, so why not help them? And the initiative can be pretty simple. Just do a bunch of them with zero consequence. And that's going to increase your visibility within your company. And then for the ones that actually matter, and if you've got the guts, then go for it. And you might actually just call us to go do it and help you produce the larger scale events. But in the meantime, just do a whole bunch of them and get stuff that works.
So do we have any questions from the audience? A few? Okay. Chris is going to bring the microphone around, so if you could wait for them so everyone at home can hear you, and we'll go from there. Who's first? Right down here.
I'd like to know what your experience are with keying green screens live and how you've handled that in the past.
I can answer some of that.
I just take the video feed, I don't key.
I mean, I think like that. This is one situation where a device like the TriCaster is awesome. It can pull keys really easy. I guess the question is how are you going to pull the key? And I'm trying to think of the cheapest way to do that consistently.
I think there's a lot of manufacturers out there who make green screens, and a lot of them are just cloth. You go to Joann Fabrics, buy your cloth. But there are some companies like PhotoFlex, for example, that have the ones that are taut, and they just pop up, and there's no wrinkles in it. And that helps for a really good key. I think another good part of that is, of course, your lighting. You want to make sure you have lighting that separates the talent from the screen, so when the machine tries to key the image, it can tell the difference between the two. And I know like the TriCaster, for example, has a great keyer built in.
Yeah, are you using something specific now, or? Yeah.
Can you talk to the microphone, please? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
It's already
Yeah.
passed away. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he was just. yeah. We haven't. I mean, just at our level, I think having access to the TriCasters, even the three
play?
350. What was the entry level TriCaster? Even we were using still has an awesome keyer, and I think that if you can get something that does a clean key, that's relatively new nowadays. Even some of the less expensive products are pretty good at pulling keys nowadays. So
I think Wirecast, yeah, Wirecast. I haven't done it with Wirecast, but I don't actually want to. It's just another thing. Yeah, it's just too much for that little guy to go and handle. It's all good, but it's just another piece of processing.
Next question.
I have
Right
a
here.
question about the music licensing you talked about earlier. What if you're streaming not-for-profit, not making any money off it, just streaming video with a music track on it? Do you still have to license that from the band or whatever, if you're not making any money from it?
yeah, I mean, technically, it's not really necessarily matter if you're making money on it or not. It's just the fact that you're broadcasting something. That's sort of where the licensing comes into issue. I think that's, for example, when we use certain union crews, just the fact that it's for broadcast, we have to pay them a different rate, a higher rate, because it's more about exposure, ownership of exposure, as much as it is whether you're making money on it or not.
Okay, thank you.
Next question. Right down here.
Yes, I'm curious about APIs. Have you done things like with Google Plus, for example? I'm sorry, with Google Hangouts. I mean, there are all these, there's Skype, and I mean, the quality's not great, but there are all of these APIs and new ways of having some kind of, collaborative video. So I'm just curious if you've worked with those, how that's the same or different than some of the other solutions.
We've done we've done webcast, well, not webcasts. An interesting project that we had with the Anchor Brewing Company was they wanted to do a Skype point-to-point with from here to a liquor store in Virginia, I believe it was. And they basically have, it's a great idea. They had the brewer in front of Skype and people at a party on the other side drinking the brewer's beer. And they would ask the brewer questions, and it was great. So what Anchor wanted was more than just a webcam. And so we provided a camera to go, well, they didn't actually know how to use it. They just got email maybe like 2 years ago, or, I mean, it's really, there's no technology there. So we provided the camera feed into Skype. So that's kind of fun and interesting. The challenge, which kind of goes back to that DSLR question, the challenge today with gear is there really isn't anything that takes HDMI in, like FireWire. I mean, it was really easy to go into any computer, a laptop with FireWire. Now there really isn't any interface to get a live stream into a computer without pieces of equipment. So the Hangouts, I've seen a couple of people do it. I think it's great. I think it looks cool. It's a whole other realm of video communication, more maybe video conferencing. I think where it becomes compelling to us is how do you actually get a camera into that. And
yeah, and we've done that too with Skype. We've held a few events where we've sort of had a back and forth Skype, and we had cameras that are even switch signal. We did switch signals, right? Didn't we, guys? I think we've done like a whole switcher, and then it got all broken down into a laptop that was feeding Skype. So instead of using the camera on the laptop, the camera signal was coming from our switcher into the laptop, and we use Skype that way.
So did that improve the quality?
Well, it's Skype quality, right? Yeah. So I mean,
it looks better.
It looks cool, but I mean, which for me, it kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is just the content. Like, was the content compelling? Technically, it was as good as Skype can be, but did it look better because we were doing the whole camera thing? Like, probably, than just like my face from my laptop that's tilted slightly back, right? So,
I think one time we even pointed a camera at a laptop or something. So, got to be crafty sometimes. I mean, there might be a little delay, but it's fun.
Are any of you using flip cameras? Just out of curiosity. Not anymore.
Not
Anymore.
Just not reliable, or
no, they
well,
killed it.
they killed it.
It's a great product.
Done.
I loved seeing, we'd go to conferences, and we record a lot of conferences, so I loved seeing marketing folks with their flip cam and their tripod just recording stuff. It was awesome. You know what's great, actually? A lot of people are using their iPhones for that. I was at the iMac World, I think it was, and I was shocked at how many people are doing dual camera iPhone shoots with interviews. And I was like, that's awesome. That's totally where it's going.
Any more questions from the audience? Oh, yeah, several. Let's start right back there in the back.
Sure. I just had a client delivery question. I have a couple questions, but how do you deliver content to clients after the fact? So if you're recording it or streaming it, if you're providing the program out of the TriCaster, what that they wanted in the end, and how is that being provided?
I think for us, it depends on how much content we're talking about. If it's a hour-long program, I mean, typically we haven't, I guess our, the longest stuff, we've always been able to break down into segments that make sense, and then we usually deliver that online. Now, how we deliver it online varies kind of a lot. We can have, we can build like a custom portal where somebody will pay to download the clip. We've just given them sort of YouTube optimized QuickTime files that they can then put on Vimeo or YouTube or whatever they want. Those pretty much that's kind of the flavors that we've been doing. It really kind of depends on how does the content want to be digested, and sometimes that's a discussion we have to make sure the client is on board with. That hey, of this hour thing, we're going to break it into 5-minute, 10-minute chunks, and if it's too long to go on YouTube, then how are we going to do that? We'll usually use a hosting like Bright Cove or something like that to put content up on, and you pay a monthly service fee to host that content on there and distribute it that way.
So for us, we'll do two things. We're completely agnostic to any tool, platform, whatever. It's really what the best fit of the collection of all those things for the client will be. But what we'll do is say we'll record a conference or we'll do a webcast or an event, and many clients will, you ask them, do you want hosting? They say, no, we'll take care of it. And so what we'll do is we'll post it to our servers, give them the link to all of that content, as well as the actual files, because they want that, it's theirs. And what inevitably happens, so within 24 hours, all of that content's already available for them to start using. And what ends up happening is, files are not unlike a tape in that they could be on a shelf or on a folder server somewhere where no one's going to get to it. And the time after that event, the longer that goes, the longer, the harder it's going to be for that file or for that event to resurface somewhere. So months will go by, and we'll send an email, or they'll send us an email, say, hey, do we still have that, or where's that? And it's like, well, it's always been on this link. Go take a look. So usually we deliver file-based, and we could either host it or deliver, or some combination of both.
Well, I think you had a couple questions. One more, and then we'll get some other people involved. Oh, no. You're good? Okay. Yes, sir.
I've got a question for enterprise events. How do you deal with PowerPoint slides?
I know when we do it, there's a couple different ways. When it's TriCaster, they have a great application called IVGA, which basically takes your laptop image, your screen image, and creates a 20 to 30 frames a second video input on the TriCaster. Matrox also makes a great device called the Convert DVI Plus, or just the Convert DVI, which takes the DVI out of your laptop and converts it to SDI, which is then a baseband video source. And that's a great solution, at least for us. Vitigo, a company out across the pond, has a great app that can use your desktop video, your desktop screen, as a video source as well.
Yeah, that's our favorite way to do it, is to take whatever that PowerPoint, laptop, the iPad these days, and convert that to good old solid video, and just treat it like it's another camera. It's our favorite way. The TriCaster it works really well also for the remote feed.
The great thing about that approach is it makes it mobile friendly as well. So there's the sort of the traditional way with the slides and the small video, which may or may not be rather mobile friendly, depending on your platform. Most likely it won't be. So going back to sort of a traditional video production approach is more universally accepted.
Do you find the client is happy, especially when you're dealing in lower bandwidth environments? Oftentimes, PowerPoint slides have a lot of small text, and they're not legible necessarily at lower bandwidth.
Are any of you familiar with a gentleman by the name of Guy Kawasaki? Right, Guy Kawasaki? His books are phenomenal, but he has a great 10-20-30 rule, which is, if I'm not mistaken, no more than 10 slides, no more than 20 minutes, no more than 30-point font. And it's a great rule for when you're creating presentations, so it translates not only for your local audience, but for people streaming as well.
Yeah, was it Walter Murch used to edit with the films? He'd edit a little moviola with screens about this big, and he'd cut out a little cardboard person and put it on the bottom so he could remember that for a person in a theater, it's this big, even though for him, it's this big, right? So it's kind of the same thing with the PowerPoints. If a client comes and they have PowerPoints that have small writing on it, immediately I'm just going to say, well, why are you using the slide in a medium that is not meant for that? And that's kind of got to be considered, especially in a live event when they have one version that's on a screen this size, and they want to take and dumb that down to something that's going to be this size that someone might be watching on their mobile phone. Like, you got to kind of figure out a plan for that. We've done it before. We've actually had two versions of the same PowerPoint, and you have a person sitting over here advancing the little screen version as the person up here is advancing the big screen version, and that's the version that goes out on the feed.
More questions?
Two questions. First one, does the TriCaster or other equipment like that work outdoors if there's no power to plug into? And second question is, how's the quality if you're streaming at night indoors, but it's a live event that you're not using bright spotlights on the talent? So it's lower light.
I mean, there's pretty much no way to do it without power that we've discovered. We've also, can you do it without internet? Like, that's a question. How do you, can you stream it over 3G or 4G? I'd ask, have you had any experience with that, Lenny?
No, but I saw a really cool box actually recently for about $25K that has a bunch of 3G or 4G modems within it. Have you guys used any of those?
We used one last year, yeah.
Yeah,
We were down at South by Southwest last year, and it was a terrible example of how to use that thing because there was no signal anywhere for anyone down there.
Yeah.
So it's called the Live U Pack, I think.
That's
it's
right.
like a backpack
yeah.
thing. It's like Israeli.
They have a
company.
smaller version I saw recently.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I mean,
Need light?
you need power.
You need power.
You kind of need power. Even if you have to get a generator or something, you have to have power. You kind of have to have internet. The mobile thing is not quite there yet. Although there are some companies that are emerging that will drive a truck out, van out to where you are and shoot the satellite to get internet. And then, as far as the lighting goes, that's where the camera will come into play. If your camera is capable of seeing pretty well in the dark, then you could get by without lights, depending on what you're shooting.
Any more questions? All right.
I was just wondering, with the TV and the smartphone able to receive 3D, what do you think the future will be for the 3D cast? You are not the one that with two, the flip phone, because the flip cam doesn't really do very good job.
I think it comes down to, I've been thinking about this for a while actually, and I think it's going to come down to when really computers or mobile devices can do 3D. As far as live streaming, although it is interesting to think about, I guess, with now like Apple TV, or even you buy like a Blu-ray player at Best Buy now, and the main menu you can watch all YouTube and you can watch all kind of stuff on your DVD player. I'd be curious to see how that plays out, but I think only now is TV getting to be spread across mobile devices prolifically. So I feel like 3D's a step behind that even. So it's a bit off in the future, I'd say, until you can start to look at 3D content a little bit more on mobile phones and stuff.
I think the interesting thing about 3D is that from a compression point of view, it really adds a lot more noise that these algorithms have been written to take away. So that becomes a challenge. But once you do get up to the higher bit rates, 2 megabits and beyond maybe, or 1.5, then it actually, a lot of that information might still be there, but I don't see it happening anytime soon.
It's got to be, because even if they could, you probably have to do a left eye, right eye stream, right? Yeah.
If I can add a point to this, I've actually experimented with it, and what it boils down to is who the hell can view it, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you might be pumping out 2 eyes and then broadcasting side by side over under interlaced, but who has a 3D computer monitor? And no one has a 3D mobile phone. So now you have to have someone who hooks up their 42-inch LCD 3D TV they have in their living room, and how many people are doing that? So it's the viewing, not the generation, that's the issue right now. They have 3D phones currently available?
Really?
Interesting.
I think the 2 GoPros are the best example of 3D that I've seen. But you can't do it. You can't do that live. But yeah, it still looked cool. Or maybe it was the content.
I think I have one more question.
I was just going to make a comment about 3D mobile. I've worked with both the LG and HTC. It is out there, but it's very problematic in that you can watch 3D on a mobile device that's specifically for it without glasses. The problem is there's such a narrow range of where you can hold it that the person can watch something for a short amount of time and hold it steady enough, but for something that's particularly long, like an event you're streaming, they would have a difficulty keeping their hand steady enough, not to mention that it tends to cause a little bit more headaches than when you're seeing something with glasses. Now, I think it's going to get there, but currently I still feel like even with those current devices, it's still fairly far behind the curve. Already with streaming, you have enough issues with broadband. I don't think adding that on top of that's really realistic.
before we sign off, I'm getting a lot of requests here to know exactly what we're using in terms of technology here. So forgive me while I fumble through this. I believe we have a crew of 6. We have 3 camera people. I don't want to be sexist here. 3 camera people, all running DVC Pro HD P2 cameras, running to a TriCaster 850 Extreme, where we're recording the ISOs. We're also using, I believe, a 12-channel mixer. Is that correct? That's correct. We also have 4 wireless lavaliers up here, as well as 2 floor mics here. What are we broadcasting at? What is our bit rate? Are we at 384?
512.
We're at 512?
640, 360 at 512.
512, okay.
30 frames.
Okay. Did I miss any technical equipment, Tony? Do you happen to know? What else we have?
Are you doing composite? Component?
Going component video? Okay. And we also have 2 speakers here, which you may not be able to see for sound reinforcement for the room. The crew here, I know, is very experienced, and I think you had it set up in 2 hours? Was that right? Okay. We're using a TriCaster 850 Extreme, which is kind of the top level what they offer. That's 8 discrete inputs and also records the ISO channels as well. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending, both at home and here in the audience. I'd like to thank Lenny, Jamie, Tony, and Victoria, the Delancey Theater, Full View Media, and New Tech for all their assistance tonight. Stay tuned to keycodemedia.com for more learning series for keeping you ahead of technology, as well as this very video on demand in the next week. Thank you very much.